Well, it's like this IVDD thing for Dachshunds, and now more dogs are starting to have it. Spaniels is the big one that's out there now.
Yep.
And I personally think that's misinformation.
Yes.
I don't see it I mean, I'm coming from the people I speak to, the people who I spoke to a lady today who she's got stud dogs, and she's got, her dogs have produced lots of litters of puppies, and I spoke to her about it, and she went, "Not got a clue what you're talking about." She said, "Never had a problem." She said, "And I would hear about it because if I'm getting breeding dogs with problems, or there are dogs that are having problems, their owners would come back to me and, these puppies have got problems or whatever."
Yeah.
So she said, "I'm not seeing it, and people are coming back to me year after year to remake their dog to create a new litter." So she said, I just don't see that problem in Spaniels.
Yeah. And it was probably a question I asked of you very early on, being hope soon to be a very new Cocker Spaniel puppy owner. And I think I'd said to you, I've come across this, reading research papers all the time. I've come across this idea that IVDD is prevalent in Cocker Spaniels. And you'd said exactly what you've just said then.
I have to say, I mean, it's just that I understand it. It's not the disc, it's not the bone bit, it's the squashy bit in the middle.
Yes.
And that squashy bit in the middle calcifies and goes, it's not squashy anymore.
Yeah.
That was a good scientific demonstration, wasn't it? Not squashy anymore.
Was squashy, but now it's not.
No, it's not. And that is the thing. Now, from what I know, IVDD there's a genetic component to it, which is again quite strange.
Yeah.
But there is an environmental one. Now, we must have bred. I've probably had a couple of hundred Cocker Spaniel puppies, and I have had one. It's not my puppy, but somebody phoned me and said my dog's going to the vets because he's got a bad back. Okay. The dog had actually burrowed under some sheds and smashed all its back in, trying to get under and get out. And it had torn all its back, and they'd had to put it on crate rest for about 4 or 5 weeks. And that's the only time it's been mentioned. The vet that the person was speaking to said this could be IVDD. But there was no examinations any further, and then the owner rang me and said, "Do you know anything about IVDD?" I said, "Well, actually, yes, I do." And that's the only time I've come across it in a spaniel. Now, Dachshunds, you can get it a lot more frequently. I mean, I think the percentage ratio is between 15 and 30% or 28% or something. It's like 1 in 3 will suffer from it.
Yeah.
But not in spaniels, I don't see it.
No. So we'd talked a little bit about it, and we'd said about doing this podcast, and we'd said about let's just sit down and have a conversation about you were a bit like, Jodie, you're coming to me with all these questions, but also I was a bit like, equally I do this for a job and I go away and read some stuff, and you'd said I've not seen it. So I thought to myself, and obviously you won't know this, we've not spoke for a couple of weeks, and I thought I'm going to go away and see what they say. See what the papers say. It's all I can do.
Yeah.
I do not work with dogs every day like you do. No. So I think something starts from somewhere, doesn't it? We all get these ideas of stuff from somewhere, and somewhere out, whether it's in the internet or whether it's in a dog breeding community, which you just said no, somewhere now, as much as we see it in other breeds, as you've just explained, you start off and you type into Google and you're thinking, I'm going to be a new puppy. Me. Yes. Anxiety. You're thinking, right, let's see what this breed's predisposed to, because I had one that dead hardy Jack Russells. Now they're fine, apart from things that you mentioned before, but they might have a few problems and they might hop, and that's quite typical.
Your herniated discs, you were saying, could have been IVDD.
Yes. So then you think to yourself, so it comes full circle, and you go, oh, we got this again. We've got a breed again, but we might be picking something. So you think to yourself, I've got to look at this. So you'll find this funny. I went away.
So you in the last couple of weeks have been going, do I actually do I want this puppy or not? Do I really, is the stress of having that same problem?
Not so much is there a stress. I think we talked about it at length, and I mean, I'm confident, it doesn't matter. Sometimes I think as scientists, doesn't matter how many papers you read, you almost become a specialist in things, like the life experience and the probabilities of things that you see kind of stand for a lot more than sometimes what you read. We can all kind of say we researched this area and this is what we found, but I think it's really important to note some of we call it limitations in research. So we say every research project we do in the papers that we publish, and I've published a few now in different areas.
Have you?
Just only a few. I'm very early. I finished my PhD in 2022, so I'm very new to publishing papers in area.
Doctor title to get you into restaurants and stuff?
No.
Just a thought.
There was a hesitation there. I was thinking, do I? No, not really. No, I don't. Although it's quite funny. You do kind of, in some ways you're a little bit, I'm definitely not mentioning it. And then obviously, sometimes it's a bit of a professional thing. You will mention it professionally. But I think sometimes socially, it's like, I just make out like it. I don't know. I suppose I'm not the type of person, is what I'm trying to say, that would push it as some sort of great thing. But actually, you know, from any discipline that you come from, if you've put time and effort into dog breeding and working with dogs and building, that up for years, or you've worked into kind of human aging, or you've done anything for a long period of time, you start to get to the point where you go, I've invested a lot of time into this. So that's where you don't mind saying, okay. But in terms of research on dogs, no clue. So I thought, do you know what, I'm going to do my normal things. So sometimes when we look at research and we go, right, we're interested in this topic, or often the projects that we work on are where there is significant knowledge gaps, and that's what we always do. We just look to identify something new that hasn't been identified before. So I just thought, we've definitely come to this definitive conclusion that Cocker Spaniels are highly prevalent. Prevalence of IVDD in Cocker Spaniels is huge.
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't believe they are.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought, but where is it? But sometimes we're told something and it's come from somewhere.
Insta, Google, Face tweet.
True. Yeah. Social media.
Yes. Okay. Tell me what I don't know.
I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. Just about the fact that I'm surprised you didn't know this about me, that we've mentioned something very briefly, and I'm surprised I haven't gone off and done a whole research project on it in 2 weeks.
I thought with that conversation, it was like, yeah, we'll discuss this, we'll discuss that, we'll go away. And I thought, we'll message each other, we'll be on the phone, and I've got this, and what do you think of that? There was nothing. And then Lisa said to me the other day, are you still filming on Saturday? And I went, I think so.
Yeah.
Not heard anything. So obviously you've been...
I'm sorry about the radio set. That's it. I've gone down a rabbit. I've been deep down. I've been doing my own research. No, I wanted to come to this a little bit like... We said we might, if it came up organically in conversation, we'd chat about it, and it has. And I thought, I don't want to come to it as somebody that would come to this and go, is it a worry as a new dog owner? And obviously I don't do this type of research, and not maybe use, hopefully some of the skills that I've, still very new in terms of academia, but some of the skills I've gained over the last few years to go, well, what does it say? Because actually I don't think, my friends and family for sure don't go, I'm interested in something, let me read the let me read the science behind it. It isn't translational to a lot of people.
It's very difficult to read it and understand what it actually means.
Yeah.
You get the little bit at the beginning that sort of presages it all and says, this is what it's all about.
You get an abstract that tells you
that's the word, an abstract. You can get an understanding, but it doesn't really give you anything. It's almost like going, what about this, this AI thing they all have nowadays?
Yes.
You've got, type in a question, AI says this. How good's that?
So...
It's not, obviously. Okay.
No, so it's... who knows? I think we don't know,
But it can only learn from what it's actually learned.
So it's synthesising, a wealth of information that I suppose as humans we wouldn't be able to synthesise so quickly. So what we do is we'll pick a research topic and we'll say, and I've been in the process and I've got one under submission at the moment about a very different topic. So what we say is, if we're key to find something out, instead of doing kind of an experimental project, if you like, so going out and working with animals or working with humans, sometimes you can say, quite a lot of people in academia and academics have done research into this similar to IVDD. So I thought there might be what we term a systematic review, a scoping review. There might be some form of review, meta-analysis that goes, all these people have done all of this research, let's put it together and synthesize that data, and we can either perform, statistics on it or descriptive analysis.
That's interesting. I read, what was it called? Anyway, I read a paper. A lady in Australia suggested it to me, and it, DOAN 2023. That's it, DOAN, and it basically does the same thing. So it took everything, different forms of training techniques, about negative reinforcement and all the other bits and pieces, and it actually went through all those pieces of research as to what they actually said. So that's the same thing you're talking about there.
Yeah, basically it collates, because what we might do in our different research groups is we might research a similar topic, so maybe IVDD, and you might say, well, we're all going to do different kind of experimental projects on it. So, you're working with maybe prevalence rates, you're working with how many numbers of Cocker Spaniels in the UK have IVDD, and there'll be different ways of collecting that data. But somebody else might have done it in Australia, and somebody else might have done it in the US, and all different research groups might be working on this at once. And, we were pretty lucky in academia to go, this is, there's a gap and let's work on this, which, hopefully we'll get onto a bit later. So I thought it's a great way to basically we say synthesize evidence, but what we mean is it's a great way to take all these different findings, put them together and say, is this like for and against? Are we saying that it is prevalent in Cocker Spaniel? Should we be worried as Cocker Spaniel owners that our dog might get this one day? Or should we not be worried? Is actually the science not backing up what people say in terms about the prevalence rates of this and how worried we should be? But in terms of speaking to AI, so I did that thing initially. Yeah. So I always start off with, what is like the word on the street? What do people say? Which we already knew what it said, because I think I'd come to you about it originally. So Google's got this feature now, of course, that you type your question in and AI synthesizes a wealth of data on the internet, and will give you a resounding result, putting us all out of jobs to synthesize this data, but no. So typed in, are Cocker Spaniel, should I be worried as a dog owner, or are Cocker Spaniels predisposed to IVDD? Yes.
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are, it says. So I thought, okay, so here's where it comes from. So I always try and start at a point. Okay. Think, okay, where does...
I see I understand that.
So I'm thinking, apparently they are. So they are. So then we...
So that's where your problems start. People take that little bit of data and go, that's the problem.
So it's synthesizing data that apparently is found on the internet, that we go, okay, instead of me reading, 400 web pages or 400 journal articles from, peer-reviewed journals, and when we say peer-reviewed, we mean it's been reviewed by experts in the field, and they've said, yes, absolutely publish this. This is worthy of... Correct. Yeah, it's correct to the best of their knowledge, and also in their field, they've got specialisms, and I'm very early in my academic career, but it's a real pleasure when somebody says, I'm trying to publish something similar to the work that you do. Would you be a reviewer for my article? So would you read this and provide critique, maybe ask for suggested changes? And basically, editors of journals are relying on other members of the academic community to go, absolutely, this should feature in your journal, or reject it, And sometimes it's immediate accept. That's quite rare, that it doesn't need any changes. We've all got our own kind of spin on things and how we'd like to see it. Sometimes we get kind of minor or major amendments and we say, yeah, but we definitely think you should publish this journal, but it needs a bit of extra of this, or this is a consideration, or it's usually, no, this isn't a good fit either for the scope of the journal, or the science isn't, good quality enough. So we kind of sit across that spectrum. So all of these journals that we see that have been published have gone through that peer review process. So there's people out there that have gone, okay. So then I started to look and I thought, what's AI based on? Is AI based on those things? Because if it is, and that's the conclusion it's come to.
But are you getting, as a research scientist, do you have access? Could I do the same searches that you do and go to the same places as you do to get all the same documents as you, or have you got special access? Have you got an all access pass that I haven't got?
I wouldn't say it's an all access pass, but what we have is like repositories of libraries where these academic papers are published that through our, our links to our institution in which where we work and people that we collaborate with, we have access to that maybe not always people that Google these things would necessarily have access to.
And then the second thing is that you understand what they actually mean.
Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, of course, if you're not a specialist in that area, then it might take a bit of extra reading. But in terms of the actual layout of articles, you would understand, and you would hopefully understand if you've ever done any sort of statistics on any data, roughly how they've got to the conclusion that they've got. But I wanted to take it back and go, okay, what does the concise little bit on Google say? So Google AI says...
That's where the problem's coming from.
So we go, where does the misinformation come from? Okay, so we go, actually, let's ask our best friend Google. So we ask Google and Google says yes. As Cocker Spaniel dog owners, they are predisposed to it, and as an owner, you should be giving this some consideration about A, initially choosing the breed, and B, how you manage that going forward. But then what happens is, I started to think, has that synthesised that like we would in a scientific review? So has that taken everything that's out there on the web about that and said, it's still a yes? Which if it did, we wouldn't have to do reviews, which we do, and we do enjoy doing them because, we take all of these papers that have eligibility criteria to be in this review and they tell us one way, yes or no. So I thought, where's this coming from?
Where do you do this in our spare time? How much part-time, or should I say how much spare time, how much free time have you spent doing this?
On this actual thing?
Yeah.
I just do this day in, day out for my actual job, so I mean, of course I enjoy it.
Of course, yeah, but you've got to have...
But now I'm thinking, let's have a little look, yeah.
So you've put...
I quite like the evening and weekend work of it. I'm like, it provides, to be honest, it's exciting to me because I'm like, I'm not a specialist in the area, so how nice to come to it with a really unbiased view.
Yes.
And what we mean by unbiased is we're coming to it with no preconceived ideas. And actually, if we're coming to it with any preconceived ideas, we're coming to it with the idea that this is an issue.
Yes.
So actually, we should really be looking for things to go, yeah, you're right, it is a really big issue. So when I looked, obviously, the AI says, yes, it is. And I thought, right, so now, really, which I really like, and we may do as part of this podcast, we go, okay, this is what we think, this is how we've interpreted this data, and other people do it on the internet, and they go, this is where we've got this information from, and they can share the papers, and I can share, I have access to those, but they are what we call open access, so anybody can read them, should you be able to download the initial article. We want them to be open access as scientists because the more people, open access means that anybody can read them, and the more people that read them, the more your research gets out into the world, which is the only thing we do it for. We want to make changes and impact, positively.
So people end up getting a better understanding, hence why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah. So what I would like to say is, any papers that I talk about now, put the links to them so that people can read them. Make your own judgments, basically, because we're all open to. We all say this. We've all got our internal kind of biases, and we say, this is how I interpret it. But you may look at it very, you may take that scientific project and go, actually, that's not what I took from that, and that's fine. That's human nature. But the good thing about AI, so this is where it allows us to provide the information. So AI will now provide hyperlinks to, this is where we've got this information from. So when I Googled this, Googled it, and it said, yeah, it's prevalent. Where did it come from? I was interested in where it came from.
Yes.
Makes it super easy to see where it come from because it links you to it.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of links for this. So we've got the PDSA charity. I've got a whole section on IVDD, Cocker Spaniels. We've got the Chaplin Veterinary Care Centre. It's an American centre for care.
Okay.
That they've got a page on IVDD and Cocker Spaniels specifically.
American Cocker Spaniels or English Cocker Spaniels?
Some of them were American.
Two different breeds.
So when we put Cocker Spaniel in, it'll bring up all of that. So an amazing thing to note that if you're a Cocker Spaniel owner and the information that's generating is from America, it might even not be relevant to you. but it picks up on the word Cocker Spaniel in the search and it provides. So there we go. There's the first kind of limitation to it. Actually, don't always read what you see because it might not be. So some of them were American Cocker Spaniels, some of them English. So then it got me more into a territory that I'm familiar, because then came up the Canine Genetics Centre at the University of Cambridge. So I thought, okay, perfect. I feel more comfortable. I feel more comfortable. If people are looking at healthy aging and they Google our research group, great. We feel more aligned to those things. So I'm thinking, okay, so it's a really different variety, but it wasn't coming from research papers. I think I really want to stress that strongly. It was coming from maybe a synthesis of evidence, but somebody that had just wrote an article online just about
where have they got it from?
Exactly. So you'd hope that would be backed up by the science, but other than the Canine Genetics Centre, there was no links to any papers. So, probably important to note at this stage, though, that it's pretty prevalent on social media as well, isn't it, at the moment, about IVDD?
I think once it starts to roll, Lisa she sent me a link to Stacey Solomon, is it? Is that her name? Stacey? She's got a dog, Teddy.
Yes, she has.
And he has just had a horrible problem with him. But basically, I saw the first video. Teddy had been to the vets. He'd had an operation, and she didn't know any more than that. But his back was smashed to pieces. Okay. His discs had all herniated and collapsed. Yeah. And I had I had two issues with that. Okay. What the video I saw was, one, Teddy has come from a rescue centre, but Teddy went from a breeder to a rescue centre. She got flack for getting a dog from a rescue centre. She got absolutely pilloried for getting the dog from a rescue centre. People saying that she's used her money to get up the queues. People kicking off because she's got a dog and she's got children. The rescue centre near me won't give. Okay. But that links back to what we were saying before. If you've got people lying because they want to give their dog up, how can you
possibly know?
How can a rescue centre be expected to know the full truth, and therefore they're covering their own back? But yes, that was the first thing I was really concerned about, is that this dog has come from a rescue centre that came from a breeder.
Yeah.
But then the thing...
I didn't know that.
Yeah. But then the thing that... Have you seen the video?
So I've seen... So now when you type it into Google, it's somehow linked to this. So the profile of it is, the high profile nature of it is linked to this now.
To this Stacey Solomon situation.
Yeah. So when you type it in, it brings up her Instagram, fortunately or unfortunately. So I don't know if she knows that. She's got millions of followers on social media.
Well, the thing I had the issue with is she said at one point, I don't know exactly how she said it, but she said, my vet has said Teddy was predisposed to it. Yeah. The poor little chap never had a chance. Okay. He was always going to get it. Now
yes, which is basically what we're talking about here, isn't it?
That's not accurate, in my opinion, because there is two sides to it. From what I know, and you might correct me here, there is an environmental side. Yeah. So, and that's everything from exercise, food, type of food, lots and lots of different things are impacting on a dog's health. So he's overweight. Yeah. And I don't know whether Teddy was, I haven't really seen pictures of him, but that extra weight that a dog might be carrying, certainly with Dachshunds, gravity's pulling their spine downwards, an extra gut weight just causes problems. So there's all those types of things. There's obviously impacts and trauma, like the one I said, that one, yeah.
And then obviously some suggestion around potentially genetic impact, maybe.
Well, I'm big into genetics for a number of reasons.
More so than me, probably. Yeah.
Do you know what? There'll be some interesting conversations later on. Yeah. Basically, I looked at this. I've spoken to so many genetic scientists over different issues. Yes. So I'm quite well up and talking to these people. And there is two genes that have mutated, and those two genes are linked to IVDD.
Yeah, so I've probably got them written down somewhere here.
Part of it is dominant and part of it is recessive. They're not sure about that yet. No. Now, recessive is dead easy to control because for it to go from the parents to the offspring to the pups, it's got to have a copy on both sides. Mother and father have both got to have a copy for that disease then to appear and be active and live and a problem. You can have it in one side and it won't actually cause a problem. Where the problem comes is that when it becomes a dominant gene or has dominant traits, it doesn't need both sides to carry it. Only one side can carry it, and then the parent can give it to the pups and the pups can have it. So that is a side you can control and manage as well because you can test for it. Now, I'm interested to know, obviously you went to Cambridge. I'd be interested to see what they say. Yeah. But what they didn't, or what I don't know whether they've done with Stacey Solomon's dog, I don't know whether they have...
Yeah, have they managed to test him genetically?
They should have tested Teddy to know whether it is genetic, because that dog has come from a breeder that's come from a rescue centre, or should I say gone to a rescue centre from a breeder. That rescue centre will know the breeder, so there are going to be other pups in that litter that could also have IVDD and could end up with the same problem that Teddy has. And therefore, by testing Teddy, you find out whether it's a genetic problem. Yep. You then go backwards, you then speak to the breeder, who then can speak, or should speak to, if they are credible, the owners, and say, listen, this is a health problem that we found.
Yes.
Now, there's the only way you can eradicate that genetic component from a dog, and that could be anything. There are over 400 and I think 450 plus genetic disorders in all the breeds. And the only way you can eradicate them is via testing, so that you can make sure you mate the right ones that are not with conditions with ones that don't have conditions. Or you can avoid it if you want to keep, because obviously you want to keep genetic diversity. So in doing so, you might say, well, that dog is a carrier for this condition. I need to find a dog that actually is clear of it, so that when I breed it, I'm reducing the amount of puppies that will have the carrier status. They're not affected by it. And then from that, you can test the puppies, keep the puppies back that you want to breed from, to maintain that genetic diversity, maintain that line. And then obviously anything that is a carrier, it goes to a home that there is never going to be any breeding done. So that dog will live a happy life, because that condition won't show up, because it's only carrier status. It's when you've got that dominant side where you just don't breed. So absolutely. I don't know whether that's happened with Stacey Solomon,
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. And I think,
Stacey, if you're watching, 1 in a million chance. But just let us know whether they've gone back and tested Teddy, because it is an important thing that you need to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's nothing wrong with information online. And this is what I was thinking. There's nothing wrong with information online suggesting that any conditions are... any dog is predisposed to any type of condition, because actually sometimes when we identify these things scientifically and genetically, like you've just explained a perfect example then, we're equipped with the knowledge then of how we can almost ethically breed so that dogs don't suffer. So actually the more advances that we make, the better it is. And actually what I would say to the situation of Teddy, which I've now since come across from doing my, my AI Google, is... he's in the best possible hands with Stacey, but the life that now Stacey has to take on, because I think the vet has said, there's a very slim chance that Teddy will ever regain the use of his back legs. I think he, really sadly is suffering now from some level of paralysis, and also what that must require for Stacey as his owner, because now she, I think, is, if I'm correct, is manually expressing Teddy's bladder as well.
Yeah, you'd have to. But there's a whole family. You've got children who had a dog that... She got kids, Stacey Solomon?
Yes.
Oh, okay. No. Yeah. You've got children who have got a dog that they now are going to have to be very careful around. They're going to be... That relationship that should have been wonderful has just been splattered apart because the kids can't play with the dog and run around with it. It's not the same thing.
And what I think I'm always cautious about when I see these things on social media is... and it resonated with me somewhat. I think Teddy is a working Cocker Spaniel, if I'm right. And obviously, you know, I'm hoping to be the owner soon of a show Cocker Spaniel. But what does that mean for people who then go, for people like me who have had dogs with health conditions previously, what does that then mean if you're somebody now that lives in a house with a working Cocker Spaniel, an English show Cocker Spaniel or other Spaniels, and then you look at that situation and you go, what decision would I be forced to make if I had a dog with paralysis of its back legs and I had to manually express its bladder? Even from, like you say, it comes back again to... this has just happened overnight, actually, with Teddy, and then the the commitment and the consequence to that.
He was running around the garden, and then it just.
She maybe went out to him, or he came, or he came in and he was dragging his back legs and probably in excruciating pain. And your thoughts are always with the family, but more so the dog, because the quality of life of the dog, I think, as a dog owner, is what you.
Dogs are built to run, and if they can't run, it's a hard decision, that one.
Yeah, so I think. It's interesting now that we go, okay, where does this idea come from? So now it's quite a noteworthy topic because you Google it, but also it's happened to somebody that is sharing that experience to such a large audience on social media. So I suppose initially when we discussed it, I was interested in kind of where it came from, but even more so now I'm like, you almost can relate to somebody and it's happening, it's having real world impact, and people have got probably Cocker Spaniels up and down the country in their home thinking, gosh, imagine if one day my dog was just running in the garden and then it's completely paralysed. Does that scaremonger a little bit? So I thought...
Well, I think it does, and I think that's the problem, and I think it's not the whole story.
Yeah.
So there is the first side, you test, DNA test. If the tests are there, make sure you're getting a dog that's been tested. If you own a dog, test it. Then at least if the dog is predisposed to that condition. It's not a guarantee 100% it's going to get it, but there is a very large chance. And then you can also start to work on the other side. So we make sure that our dog doesn't have too many snacks, isn't getting too many bits and pieces of treats.
Yeah.
We keep the weight down. We up the exercise to make sure the dog is doing more things. We make sure that we're not having a dog that, I've got some Springer Spaniels and they just love to run. I mean, they're running down the field, they're bouncing over things, jumping over each other.
Yeah, no,
let's just calm that down a bit.
Yeah. More controlled activity.
Yeah. So we manage the dog's activity so the dog can still get the best out of what its life, but we're not letting it run around with gay abandon because there is a potential risk aspect to it.
Yeah. And if you're not there kind of watching it, then you can't really say whether or not it was, like you say, something, an injury that's happened, or whether it's just happened, as a consequence of that. So I thought, right, okay, let's have a little look about what the research says.
Go on then, let's see.
So as you said, there was some kind of American links, and that obviously they're not exactly linked to this circumstance that we're specifically talking about, and obviously we're based in England and other things, so I thought we'll just go with the Canine Genetics Centre just to have a look. Yes. Predominantly. So we go on to the page, and straight away we have past studies have shown, so this is something that I've written, so past studies have shown that there is an inherited genetic aspect to IVDD, which is an overexpressing FGF4 retrogene, explaining then the association between Cocker Spaniels and IVDD. So, okay. And so the nice thing about that is the linker paper. So we've got Brown et al., so et al. And others, Brown and others, 2017. Yeah. So we go, okay, perfect. We'll keep working down the page, but it's backed up by the science, so that's what that suggests. So... it goes quite informatively into the retrogenes and the expression and why that is the case, and that's great for people who are genetic scientists and also others, but for dog owners like myself, and I'm thinking, okay, so we've got the Canine Genetics Centre, so they're stating that Cocker Spaniels are at high risk of developing IVDD, more so than most other breeds, and that Cocker Spaniels independently make up for 15.5 of all the IVDD cases that they see specifically at Queen's Veterinary School Hospital, which is linked to the University of Cambridge. So that's over the last 5 years. So over the last 5 years, out of all the breeds that they see, 15.5% of them are Cocker Spaniels.
That's a lot.
Much higher than that is Dachshunds.
Yes.
But, yes, because some will be 0.5% or 0% in terms of... So I'm thinking, oh, right, we're down this hole now. We're thinking it's not a problem. Okay, so I think, okay, let's go back to the brown paper. So we've got the link to the brown paper about there's an inherited gene to IVDD, which is obviously an overexpression of this FGF4 on the CFA12, explaining the association. Okay, so to a lot of people, this is... It could be any letters, couldn't it? It's no relevance. Okay, so I'm trying to...
That gene is the same gene in every dog, isn't it? So that gene, that mutation, for another breed to actually have that problem, it has to have that gene. That gene has to be identified. And not all dogs have that mutation.
No.
And not all dogs in that breed have that mutation. So there's a lot of dogs that will test negative for those results because they won't have, which basically they might be predisposed as a breed, but not all dogs not all dogs have
that. So we go to the brown paper originally, and the brown paper predominantly isn't actually talking about, so it's still the FGF4 retrogene, but specifically they're more focused on something which is CFA18, so it's not the CFA12 retrogene. So they're more focused on that for the study. So there's a little bit of misinformation about the facts of that, because
that paper's not exactly what they...
So it goes into it later on, which backs up the link, but it isn't specifically looking at that. So what then happens through the paper is, for this particular retrogene, which you'll be better at probably knowing this than me, but it's talking about a specific condition where it's the length of bones.
Yes, long bone. Yes. So
that
there's two genes together, and one of them is more IVDD, but the other one is about the lack of growth in long bones, and that then can be I don't know what the correct word is, but an indicator that they're going to have a problem with IVDD later. Yes. One of them's purely IVD, one of them links to IVDD.
Yeah. So, I mean, apologies to anybody out there for this pronunciation, but I think it is something along the lines of chondrosplasia.
Yes.
So then when you start to read into the papers, you could understand why this might be quite prevalent for Dachshunds, because we have this idea about short legs, long body.
Yes.
So it did interest me, because I thought we're then in this space where we're putting Cocker Spaniels into the same breed type, so that it's all under this in terms of genetic.
Yeah.
So the actual study, it's not true for Cocker Spaniels in this study, and it states that.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Where did they get the 15% from?
So the 15% they say is from the cases that go into their veterinary hospital per year over the last 5 years, nothing related to research papers. So they say that's just the dogs we've treated, it says, in our Queen's Veterinary School Hospital. But the idea around there's an inherited genetic aspect is linked to the brown paper, but the brown paper says that's not the case in Cocker Spaniels.
Well, quite interesting. Okay, so...
There's a lot to unpick there, isn't there?
There is. So the first thing is that how many of those dogs came into the hospital with potential back problems that was environmental? How many were overweight? How many had been climbing under sheds? How many had fallen off the top of a whatever?
Yeah.
So there's that side, but also how many had you DNA tested to find out whether they were actually hereditary for IVDD or whether it was environmental?
Yeah, so that's just a statistic about the 15.5%, but it doesn't explain why.
Right.
So it doesn't help us as dog owners go, well, how can I make my dog not part of that 15.5%? Or how can I actively seek out that at least the genetic part, if that's true, they wouldn't be predisposed because I've maybe asked a breeder about this or so on. So the actual paper, the brown paper, says that Cocker Spaniels specifically do show a high frequency of the FGF4 insertion, but specifically on CFA12, not 18. The paper's specifically looking at 18, and that does say that that's not true for Cocker Spaniels. They don't have that particular genetic mutation. So actually, they do basically back up exactly what you've just said, and said actually the segregation of both of those, so the CFA12 and the 18, so the segregation of those could actually mean that over time we can genetically test to eliminate type 1 IVDD, which type 1 IVDD, if my what I've looked at is correct, it is occurring in those chondrophobic breeds, but it's actually characterised by premature degeneration. So it isn't the kind of aging of discs.
The younger dog that gets it. Yeah. It's the younger dog that gets it.
Which maybe would be linked to Teddy, maybe, if he was genetically tested. We might find that he's younger, and that might be, he might have type 1, IVDD.
Well, I think listening to what she said, because she said something about his discs were all smashed to pieces, or worse to that effect.
Yeah.
Now, from my perspective, that's not something that's from trauma, or, I mean, I'm sure Stacey Solomon has given that dog the best possible life. Yeah. I bet it's had the best food, the best toys, the best this, the best that. I don't think it's wanted for anything in its life. Yeah. So therefore, to actually think that she's done something to cause that condition, I actually can't believe that one out. I don't know the woman, I don't know who she is. Yeah. I just know she's got a lot of followers, and I don't even know what she does. So it's just, if you've got that many followers, you are going to obviously have a few quid in your pocket, yeah. And you're going to make sure your dog has the best life, aren't you? Yeah. Simple as that. So I can't see. So I look at that, and I looked at that, went, that dog needs testing.
Yeah.
He needs to be tested.
Yeah. And if it is a genetic component and it's type 1 IVDD, then that expands. There's nothing more she could have done. No.
But you can then go back, tell the breeder. Yeah. The breeder then tests his dogs, and before you've then stopped those dogs breeding.
Yes. So there is, like this says, actually genetic testing over time could eliminate this for future dogs.
Won't eliminate IVDD from an environmental impact.
No.
But it will.
But it'll eliminate, if they're saying type 1 is linked to specifically genetic mutation, yes. It would hopefully eliminate type 1, and degeneration over time would occur, and there would be other...
Breeding dogs without genetically testing them for predisposed conditions, and there's lots of things you could say the dog has, but there's certain ones that are affected. Cocker Spaniels are affected by a few conditions, and if you breed without testing them, it's like walking through a minefield. Yeah. There's a bang about to happen. Yeah. But if you test... like having a map that shows you where the mines are. Yeah. And you can say, right, well, this dog's healthy, we can breed this one with that one, and this one isn't healthy, so we don't breed it. You just make sure you breed the best of the health, because that's what people want. People want healthy dogs.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, nobody wants to find themselves, I never envisaged with my first dog that I would be in a situation where, like you say, when I talk about bulging discs in the spine, I say that's quite a lay person coming into being a dog owner. But actually, when you look about what IVDD is, it probably was that. And like you say, if somebody now was to tell me, if somebody had genetically tested Kobe's parents, there's a chance that Kobe wouldn't have had that. As dog owners, we go, this is great science, that we know that we can have responsible conversations with responsible breeders and try to eliminate as much as possible. But of course, there's lifestyle factors, isn't there?
Of course there is. But if you're
giving your dog the best possible chance with what you've got,
and you're giving the owners the best possible chance of having a healthy puppy,
and hopefully peace of mind and other things. So I was thinking, okay, so the good thing about research is every single time we pitch an idea, we say this has come from somewhere, and it usually is in the introduction of a paper, and we'll say this is where we've got this idea from. This might be A, worthy of looking at, or B, it's coming from a place, which always leads us back. So the Brown paper was fantastic. So it said, no, not true for Cocker Spaniels, but they do have a different expression of the gene. So maybe, okay, here's the next project for either that research team to pick up or another Cambridge and say, it's not that gene, but it might be this one. Have a look at this one. Because if we can identify specifically what it is, we can help these dogs, right? We can say, here's what we can look for and test in parents so that we don't end up. So, but I was really interested in seeing where this idea that IVDD is prevalent in Cocker Spaniels came from. So the study that the Brown paper, so this is 2017, this paper. So it nicely directs you to a paper by William Priestler in 1976. So as far as my I say quick search, but quick search is looking on databases.
Yeah, your quick search is 7 days a week, every evening and weekends. We'll be looking at this subject.
24 hours a day. But this study is the thing is, kind of papers done before then, there's probably been years of work into the making of that, but we start to see papers on the internet that have been scanned in, paper copies of research papers, which is amazing, whereas they're all online now. I mean, 1976 certainly isn't old, but yeah, his paper is scanned in.
50 years old.
Hey?
76 is virtually 50 years old, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it makes sense that it's scanned in, but it doesn't feel that long ago. Yeah, 50.
It's about that.
Yeah, 49 years old, is it? Yeah. So he did a study that examined IVDD occurrence by age, breed, sex in 8,107 dogs. 117. Stand corrected. Read that wrong. So his study looked at, it was a really nice study actually, even for being back in 1976. Said, let's take all these dog breeds and let's go, what is the occurrence? Which sometimes is where we have to start. In order to get true prevalence, we have to go, let's kind of have a look at a really large sample, an unbiased sample. So taking it back to the Brown paper, one of their limitations of their study is that they only looked at IVDD in veterinary hospital population breed. So they've gone into a vet, so very similar to this canine, very similar to the Queen's Hospital in University of Cambridge, and it is a little bit biased, because if we only work our prevalence on the people that we see or the animals that we see,
we don't know how many haven't.
We don't know. There could be 15.5% of all the animals we see, all the Cocker Spaniels that we see with IVDD, but actually if we looked at world population of if we looked at world population of English show Cocker Spaniels and said how many of them have it, all working Spaniels the same, it would be 15.5% is very different in that population compared to 15.5% of what is that I'm interested in. What's the number?
That's to me, how many.
So then we get to the Priestler study and we go, okay, well, we can start to work out that prevalence, because if we've got 8,117 dogs, we need to look at the numbers of Cocker Spaniels that make up that number.
Yeah.
So all 8,117 dogs had IVDD. That's why they were in the study. That was the inclusion criteria. And out of those 8,117 dogs, 183 of those were Cocker Spaniels.
Okay.
So we're not near this 15-20% prevalence by any stretch, are we, of all the dogs that we see there? So we start to look at it. So William Priestler back then does a thing that we still do now, and he works out a risk ratio. We do it with everything. So for a normal dog owner, a risk ratio would be, what are my chances of, because I've got a Cocker Spaniel, it will have IVDD?
Okay, cool, yeah.
So it's just a strength, and that works on, it's either really, really likely or it's very, very unlikely.
Okay.
And statistically, we can work in two ways. So we either say, we kind of set statistical significance at 0.05, and that accounts for, there's a 95% chance that it will happen. If we set it at 0.01, which statistically, if your data is good enough for that, that is a 99% chance, of it happening. 99.9% chance, or 95% chance. So when he kind of set the statistical significance for this paper, there was breeds that had a high risk ratio. So it was almost like, we know they're going to get it. And this was back then, he was alluding to this idea.
Beagles, Dachshunds, long-spined dogs.
Yeah. So here we go. So he set his statistical significance at less than or equal to 0.01. So this is like the most statistically significant breeds of the highest risk breeds. So 84 breeds were reported to have had at least one case of IVDD. So then we go, the Dachshund, the Pekingese, Beagle, Welsh Corgi, Lhasa Apso, Shih Tzu, statistically significant for IVDD. Not Cocker Spaniels. They're not high risk of IVDD, genetically.
So from his data, he then looked at there were so few of them.
So then he goes, it's not, and it's important to note, so he controlled for quite a lot of things. He controlled for age, sex, whether breeds were, if they were males that were spayed, or there was females again, neutered, and female spayed. So he looked at whether it was high risk in female dogs over male dogs. So he looked at a lot of different things, and he says back in, what we're talking, 1970, what did I say, 76, it's not a problem for Cocker Spaniels. Yeah, okay, we have them, but we have them, don't we? Because we can't account for possibly every single lifestyle factor.
Correct, yeah. So
he says, okay, it might be genetic, but in terms of the numbers, and if we think about the differences, 183 Cocker Spaniels presented with IVDD out of the 8,000. 3,898 Dachshunds in that study. So let's talk about if we're thinking about a dog with prevalence. Interestingly, Stacey Solomon has
a Dachshund, yeah.
So not to scare people with Dachshunds either, but we've got a kind of a bit of a... So it's forming a picture here of, okay, when we look at the Canine Genetics Centre, it's inherited, and your Cocker Spaniel's going to get it.
Well, just on a point there, they've got a genetic side. You can test through these people.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to them about a few different things in the past. What's interesting is that when you look on their test part of their website for IVDD, and I've looked at, there's a couple of genetic companies, I'll come on to the other one in a second, but when you look on the test, it tells you the dogs that the test is useful for.
Yeah.
And the dogs and the breeds, not the dogs, the breeds that it's the tester will be useful for.
Yeah.
When you read down that list, there is no Cocker Spaniel. Mm-hmm. So that would lead me to look at and go, it's not predisposed in that condition, in that breed, because they haven't. When you do a genetic test, LeBocklin, who's another company, they will have, when you look at their test, it's easy to explain with them, you have, at the top it says test IVDD or whatever, and then it says all breeds, and then underneath it has breeds listed.
Yes.
Now, when those breeds are listed, what that means is that the test has been verified against that breed. Yeah. So they have found a dog with the condition, with the symptoms, and they have then tested for it and found that DNA, genetic mutation in their dog. So therefore, this test has been verified being correct for that dog.
Yeah.
And again, there is no mention of Cocker Spaniel.
Yeah.
So therefore, there's no validated test that I can see to say that your Cocker Spaniel needs to be tested for IVDD.
Yep. And I think it's really important, I suppose, I know we've been talking a little while, but I think it's important to probably say that it's not that I've done this research and I go, you said it wasn't a problem, and actually it's not a problem. It's not that you don't see IVDD in Cocker Spaniels. It's not that there's any problem. Actually, there's only actually scientific advances. If it actually can be linked genetically, that is only better for dogs, because then we can test for it and breeders can test for it. And then, like you say, you can hopefully get to the point where if it is a genetic mutation, that side of it can be limited or, maybe one day eradicated. You've got the lifestyle factors. So what's important is to say your dog might get it. You can't, we can't suggest anything, but there is a bit of a misinformation out there that whatever we do as dog owners, if we own Cocker Spaniels, they're predisposed to it. It's genetically, and there's nothing we can do to help them. But actually, that's not strictly true. No. So brings me kind of around, and I know I've probably spent a bit too much time digging into this, but
I didn't expect you to go this far into it.
Yeah. So what's happened is the Canine Genetics Centre So you work your way through this page, and I'd kind of gone off then a couple tour papers and come back. And then we get to the point, I think, which is most important, that they say they've identified the occurrence of certain DNA variants, and that some of those are in fact present in Cocker Spaniels. But I think the single most important line is, it cannot explain the whole story. They have it written. And they say, there is almost certainly lifestyle and or genetic risk factors that remain unidentified. So which is really amazing about this research is, so much so in 2022, I can't find this at the moment, so if anybody does listen to this out there and finds this paper, I've done a bit of digging and I can't find it, other than writing to the researchers myself. So at the end of 2022, the centre has actually done, which is linked to the University of Cambridge, a survey for Cocker Spaniel owners. So this is where I was getting to. I was like, let's not just see the prevalence of IVDD in the Cocker Spaniels that we see in a veterinary hospital or surgery. Let's look at all the people in the UK that don't take their dog ever to the vet, and for example, dogs that you've bred and are now living healthy lives out with their owners would form part of that survey. So in 2022, they did a survey and they asked owners to feed back on the survey. So what you had to do as a dog owner was you had to give your dog's age, sex, weight, limb length, neuter status, activity levels and participation in events if you trained your dog specifically in agility, flyball, those sorts of things, and whether your dog has a history of IVDD or not. So, I could maybe fill it in a year's time with Marlowe and say, actually, this is all the things, and measure all these things and go, nope, so far, touch wood, nothing. So they actually got an overwhelming 13,500 responses to this survey. So 13,500 Cocker Spaniel owners have responded to this. So they're saying that data analysis could explain environmental risk factors for IVDD, and they've made further grant applications to then understand both that data and then to write to those dog owners and say, bring your dog in and let's genetically test them, and then we'll link that.
Okay.
So at the moment, there's no outcomes of that. When you look at their research centre, they just say, we're analysing the data to explain whether, neuter status, maybe time of neutering, which is another thing we've talked about, whether limb length, age, sex, weight, like you say, if they've got particularly dogs in the Cocker Spaniels in the UK that are overweight, underweight, and then obviously IVDD prevalent, has your dog got IVDD, yes, no. Yeah. And it will, in 13,500 responses, there will be trends in that data about what the commonalities are, lifestyle factors.
Correct, yeah. Because I say exercise or lack of exercise is one. Food, the amount that they're eating, the actual type of food that they're eating. I can't remember where I saw it, but I saw a document the other day that was saying that if you're feeding healthy food, and it talks through the types of food, you can get an extra 3 years or 32 months, I think it was, out of your dog's life. Yeah. If you're feeding it garbage and rubbish, and and they've listed all the different types of food, and to actually then for a research paper to say you can get an extra 32 months out of your dog's life.
And who wouldn't want that?
No, everybody would want that.
We want them to live. We want them to outlive us. Yeah. We want them to live forever. We don't want the pain of having to say goodbye to them. We've said that enough. Yeah. But I think, and that kind of rounds up that topic, but we're at a place where we'll search for it on AI. It says they're genetically predisposed. You get people, a simple dog owner like me or like Stacey Solomon, and you go to your vet and your vet tells you that they are genetically predisposed to this. There's nothing that you could have done. It was always going to get it. Yeah. But you dig into the research and it's not there. It's not there to suggest that. And it's not that it's not going to be there.
There are dogs that will get it genetically. Yeah. There are dogs that will get it through environmental and lifestyle choices that the owner makes. It is there, but it is not.
It's not a dead certain thing that Cocker Spaniel owners out there should be thinking, do I rehome a dog now because I can't face the consequence if this happens to me? I can't have a dog paralysed, or I can't have a dog that I've got to manually express. You know, it's a bit scaremongering, isn't it?
It is very scary because, as I say, those things, you know, I guess social media is functioning around that. Mm-hmm. You know, people like the drama, and I think it's very difficult because you go to the vet and you expect the vet to know, to give you the best advice and be correct every time, but that's not always the case because they're learning, they're developing. You know, there could be a younger vet that hasn't really got much experience out of veterinary school, and they're just trying to find their feet and they're figuring out things, or they're asking. It's very difficult. I think that is a mistake that we make because we assume that all vets are all seeing, all knowing.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to be honest about things and say, you know, I do research into healthy ageing, but not all geriatricians. You know, I speak to geriatricians, you know, throughout the year, or you know, ask for their advice on certain projects that I do. And vets and medical doctors and other people in that field, they're almost like doing the doing. They're seeing dogs day in, day out, and very similar to yourself. But sometimes the research that we do a little bit behind the scenes gets a little bit lost in translation, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. So it's easy for me, that somebody that kind of reads these things, to go away and say, oh, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes looking at IVDD, and go, I'm able to inform myself and say, actually, what is kind of suggesting, there actually isn't. You know, I came to you and said, what do you think, Jason, in all the Cocker Spaniels you've bred, or the people that you speak to that breed Cocker Spaniels, is it a problem for you? And you go, it's not a problem for me, I don't think it's a thing. And then I go away and look at the research, and actually the research goes, this isn't really a thing.
But AI says it is.
But AI, social media, maybe certain vets say, this is a huge thing. We should be really worried about this. So we need to align, I think. We need to kind of, I suppose, debunk the misinformation and say...
Yeah, I think that's the thing we need. It's that they do get it, they can get it.
It's not saying that they won't get it. You know, there's absolutely... When they say there's 15.5% of the Cocker Spaniels that go to them have got it, not even 15.5% of the Cocker Spaniels, sorry, 15.5% of all breeds they see with IVDD are made up by Cocker Spaniels. That is quite a lot of Cocker Spaniels that are suffering. And that's the main, surely that's the main aim of this.
There are so many factors in that. It's like, what is the owner like? You know, what's the environment that the dog's been living in? How's the dog been exercised? All those factors.
And I think upon the publishing...
Yeah, they could be IVDD cases. All of them could be. But it's because the owners have done something wrong.
Rather than...
the dog's genetically predisposed to it.
This idea that we can't do as owners because they're always going to get it is never what we should be hearing, because there's always things that we can do. And I think that's why I'm so interested. I can't find it at the moment if it's out there, but I would be interested in it. And I'm a researcher, and I know it takes a long time to analyse data, but I want to see the outcome of this survey.
That's from the Cambridge people.
Yeah. So they're going to be able to publish data.
Pull a few strings and have a word with them.
I doubt it. I don't think I'm that. No. I'd be interested to email them and just say, how's the analysis going? I'm not even a person who works in this area, but I'm just interested as a dog owner, you know.
Look at my podcast. That's what you could tell them. Go and look at my podcast.
My podcast and see how I don't know, but that's the thing, I think.
And I think that's the other point, isn't it? At the end of the day, we can look at what we look at. I can say that I don't see it.
Yeah. And I can say I've maybe not found it in the research. Doesn't mean it's not there.
But ultimately, this brings to the other point, is if anybody's got any papers to add to that, anything, this isn't about an environment where we're right, you're wrong, or you're right and they're wrong. It's about putting the information out to debunk the misinformation. So if anybody has anything else, if you found a paper that we haven't, please just put it in the comments, put a link to it, let everybody else, because if we can make a space where people can come and research a subject, people who are worried about IVDD can go, oh, I heard this podcast, go and have a look at it. Yeah. And they can listen to it, they can read the papers, they can read anybody else's paper they've put to it, and make some sense out of it. They're making informed decisions about how they need to work with their dog.
Yeah, and I just think it's more about going to a space and going, we're just two people, and this is your experience of breeding and my experience of reading. doesn't mean it's not there, doesn't mean that it hasn't got a place if it is there. You know, if there is a single genetic mutation that can be identified that then, for type 1 IVDD, can lead to advances that Cocker Spaniels don't have to experience genetic predisposition to a condition, anything that makes dogs' lives better.
What you would do now is that if you find the dogs that have got it, so how I would do it anyway, you would find the dogs that have got it, you'd test them, and then you'd go back and look at their lines. And you say, right, this line has it. It's hereditary. It doesn't just suddenly pop up in the middle of nowhere. It's not like cancer. It's got to have come from somewhere. Same with your research. It's got to come from somewhere. And you then go back to the next generation and you go back. This is where I went down the genetic wormhole with a breed that we deal with. And there is so many things and so many different dogs that have it that, you know, if you can test for the genetic, because if people aren't testing, it's not, you can't see it. But if you then go back with the dogs that have got it, so as I say, Teddy, and I hope Teddy, you know, gets better. I mean, poor little fella. I mean, you know, but ultimately you'd test those dogs, you'd go back to the breeder who would test their dogs, and then any dogs that they were breeding that had the genetic mutation, that, again, even with the genetic mutation, it doesn't mean to say they're going to get it, they're more predisposed to get it. So they can still breed they would probably find in that litter that there is, let's say if there was 5 dogs, 6 dogs in the litter, you know, Teddy's got it, you might find one that doesn't have it, and 2 that have it at less serious. So, but what you would do is you go, right, that dog's got that, so it could pass it on, so we don't breed. And we stop breeding. That's why you do hip scores. That's why you do genetic tests. That's why you do eye tests, because you want to make sure you're breeding healthy dogs. And you don't want to make these diseases go further. So I think the case is for this. I mean, same thing for Dachshunds. You should be testing every damn Dachshund out there to know which ones have got it, so you don't breed those dogs anymore. You can't stop the owner who's going to feed their dog chocolate biscuits every day. You know, that's, you know, you can't stop that, but you can educate that. But you can, the breeders shouldn't be breeding if they have got that test done. But as I say, with the Cocker Spaniel, the genetic companies don't have a test that is specifically designed for English Cocker Spaniels. So it hasn't, from what I have seen and what I know, is that it hasn't been validated. It's not to say they haven't got it.
But it doesn't seem to be.
Not that there's a specific test for it. It's non-specific.